Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking what is honestly a true historical thriller. We're going to look at the incredibly dramatic, almost unbelievable story of how the French absolute monarchy accidentally destroyed itself entirely by mistake while desperately trying to save itself.
Let's kick things off with this chilling quote from the French political thinker Alexis de Tocqueville. It really hits the nail on the head and perfectly sets up the dramatic irony of what we're talking about today. You see, in the years just before 1789, King Louis XVI and his ministers weren't actually trying to oppress the masses. They were just trying to reform a completely broken system. But as we'll see, the king's desperate attempts to mend the monarchy's ways actually lit the fuse that blew up his own throne.
Section 1. The Financial Time Bomb.
So, picture this. It's the summer of 1786, and France is sitting on a massive financial time bomb. Finance Minister Calonne has to deliver some really terrible news to King Louis XVI. The French monarchy is quite literally on the absolute verge of financial collapse. 50%, half of the king's entire annual revenue, was already pledged strictly to paying off the interest on their debt. A lot of this debt came from wars, especially their recent highly expensive intervention in the American Revolution. Now, when half of your income goes entirely to the interest on your credit cards, well, the math just doesn't work. It's completely unsustainable. Lenders were getting terrified of a royal bankruptcy, and drastic change was absolutely imperative.
Calonne was looking at an impossible mathematical task. The royal budget deficit was running at over 100 million livres a year, but even his boldest proposed new taxes would only generate about 33 million livres. It really doesn't take a brilliant accountant to see that this gap is just too huge. Calonne realized that minor tweaks weren't going to cut it anymore. He told the king they had to revitalize the entire state by fundamentally reforming its very constitution.
Section 2. The Assembly of Notables. Now, Calonne knew his reforms were so radical that the traditional aristocratic courts, which were known as the parliaments, they'd never let them pass. So he decides to completely bypass them. Why? Well, under the old system, the nobility and the church were largely exempt from special taxes. Pretty nice deal for them, right? Calonne proposed replacing this messy patchwork with a single tax on landed property paid by the owner regardless of their social status. This was massive. It threatened to completely shatter centuries of French social hierarchy. An advisor at the time even called it an announcement of liberty and equality.
To force this through, Calonne proposed bringing back a long-dead institution, the Assembly of Notables. This thing hadn't been used since 1626. It was basically a group of hand-picked deputies brought together by the government. Calonne's big hope here was that these prominent figures, princes, archbishops, dukes, and mayors, would just blindly rubber stamp his program. Actually, one chronicler back then joked they would act like toy Chinese pagodas, which is basically the 18th century version of bobblehead dolls, just nodding along in agreement to whatever the king's minister wanted.
But here's the twist. They did not. The notables unexpectedly and stubbornly resisted. Stalled out and frustrated, Calonne makes a fatal miscalculation. He decides to bypass the notables and appeal directly to the public. He's out there printing and distributing his proposals in the streets, even having priests read them to their congregations, denouncing his opponents as selfish. The Marquis de Lafayette actually noted that this kind of public appeal would have been considered sedition even in revolutionary Boston. It was a wild move. The notables were outraged, the king lost his nerve, and Calonne found himself fired.
Section 3. The Rise of Radicals. So Calonne is gone, but he had opened Pandora's box. This sudden, massive, and very public crack in absolute rule allowed Enlightenment thinkers to rapidly mobilize public opinion, and suddenly, outsiders had a massive platform. Take Jacques-Pierre Brissot, for example. He was the ambitious son of an innkeeper and an unwilling former guest of the Bastille prison. Or Count Mirabeau, a heavily indebted nobleman with a scandalous past who had actually been imprisoned via a royal order requested by his own father. Both of these men used the crisis to sell their brilliant talents as writers and polemicists. Almost overnight, they pivoted from being societal outcasts to powerful voices demanding a national constitution.
The really crucial point here is just how fast the conversation shifted. I mean, it started with trying to balance a royal ledger, right? But soon, these wild, utopian demands were flooding the public sphere. Reform clubs were suddenly batting around ideas for planting potatoes to relieve poverty, expanding global free trade for world peace, and, really radically for the time, the destruction of slavery. Brissot even founded the Society of the Friends of the Blacks in early 1788 to push for abolition. The debate had completely outgrown the king's control.
Section 4. The Monarchy Strikes Back.
Realizing they were fast losing their grip, the monarchy tried to strike back. A new minister named Brienne took over. But he faced the exact same problem, a massive deficit and defiant parliaments that flatly refused to register any new taxes. They argued that only the whole nation, assembled in the Estates General, could approve new taxes. Frustrated, the king and Brienne reverted to the oldest play in the absolutist playbook. In November 1787, during a super tense 8-hour session with the Paris Parliament, Louis XVI busted out a lit de justice. This was a traditional ceremony that allowed him to personally override any judicial opposition. When his own cousin, the Duc de Leon, stood up and declared the king's action illegal, Louis just shot back with words his ancestor Louis XIV would have absolutely loved. "It is legal because I will it."
After that, order collapsed with terrifying speed. Look how fast this moves. In July 1787, the Parliament demands the Estates General. By August, the king exiles the magistrates to the provinces. By November, he forces laws through with his lit de justice. And by May 1788, we reach an outright military standoff, with royal troops actually surrounding the Parliament building in the middle of the night to arrest defiant judges. The absolute monarchy was literally at war with its own judicial system.
Section 5. The point of no return.
That military intervention in May 1788 was the point of no return. It triggered a profound ideological shift across France that just couldn't be contained anymore. Just listen to the wording used by one of those arrested magistrates, Duval d'Epermesnel. As he's surrendering to royal troops, he isn't speaking like some privileged, aristocratic judge trying to protect his tax exemptions. No, he's speaking like a martyr. He claims his real crime was defending public liberty. Around this time, the Parliament's official declarations actually stopped calling the French people royal subjects and started calling them citizens. They laid down fundamental constitutional principles, like guarantees against arbitrary arrest and the right to representation, and they claimed these rights stood higher than the king himself.
And that brings us to the end of this explainer, and to a question that still echoes in political history today. Can a deeply flawed system ever truly reform itself from the inside? King Louis XVI and his ministers were just trying to fix a simple, albeit massive, accounting error. But by pulling on the thread of tax reform, they unraveled the entire social fabric of France. They proved Tocqueville right. In their desperate attempt to mend their ways, they accidentally handed the public the language, the outrage, and the opportunity to tear the whole system down to the ground. It really makes you wonder, when a structural foundation is built entirely on inequality, is reform just another word for revolution? Think about that for a bit, and we'll catch you next time.